Welcome to RHI's Sociable City Interviews, where we meet with global thought leaders on nightlife and the social economy. Today we are here with Tom Moriarty, Principal, Retail Development Strategies. He is a leading authority on planning downtown districts and conducting economic studies.
Hey, Tom, it's great to see you, and thank you for taking the time from your schedule to be with me today.
Hi, Jim. Glad to do this and very happy to support RHI's ongoing content development. It's a
Yeah,
great idea.
okay. Well, you and I have a really long history, and I always look to you as kind of a mentor because you were really one of the founders of the principles of Main Street. So why don't you give a little bit of background for from that moment in time to where you are today? Just a little bit of history of your evolution.
You're right. I was in one of the original three Main Street demonstration communities and then moved to Washington in 1980 and helped set up the Main Street Center. And that's when the Main Street approach was developed as a way of training the new states we were bringing in, the new towns. And although I've been out of it for a while, the Main Street program is continuing to thrive, now called Main Street America. And I believe there are about 4,500 cities that have put the Main Street approach in place with downtown management. One of the things that you and I've shared often is that we think there's a pretty good overlay with the idea of entertainment district and nightlife management. And your predictions about that have all come true with night mayors and nightlife managers in major cities in the US, in South America, and Asia, and Europe. You're sort of on the top of that trend, and you saw it coming a long time ago. So there is a lot of mutual appreciation for that idea of paying attention and having a central management source. My own background is in architecture and preservation. That's how I evolved into Main Street. And Main Street led me into the real estate economics of what it takes to make commercial districts work, whether it's day part retail and food service and consumer services, or nightlife, food service, beverage bars, entertainment venues, movie theaters, and all that stuff. I just love the idea of a commercial district as a place that a wide range of the populations can come together and share happy experiences together. So I've been involved in that for a very long time and for quite a while on your board with RHI. So all of my interests have come together around that and are manifesting in many ways through Responsible Hospitality Institute.
Well, I know that you also do work around just economic studies and studying the economics of main streets and downtowns and also looking at the impact of major development. I know you're working on the Seattle airport in terms of
Yeah.
revitalizing retail there. So you really kind of have your finger in a lot of different points. But where do you see COVID over the past year as impacting these main streets, downtowns, now with airports? I was just recently in the San Jose airport for my first flight, and there are many of the storefronts that are just
Yeah.
closed.
Well, the airport world is peculiar in that you have a captive market, and your rent is tied to the number. Typically, the rent guaranteed that the vendors provide is tied to the number of passengers going through what they call and planing passengers, which is half the total, and the people getting on the planes are the one who buy. People who are getting off don't buy as often. So
Mhm.
when the passengers disappear, as they did for 15 months, there was no passenger count against which they could collect rent, and it's a serious problem.
Mhm.
Uh, on main streets in the commercial districts, the same thing happened, and that was on top of the normal pressures that small businesses and locally owned businesses, whether they're stores, retail stores, or food and beverage enterprises, or bars, or entertainment venues, all of them suffered when nobody could go downtown again, and everybody was frightened and afraid to go places until we understood more about COVID. So, in addition to the normal challenges of getting financing, getting a reasonable rent, trying to draw customers on an individual basis, all the things that small businesses face, the loss of the customer base for COVID really had a profound effect. And that's running in tandem with the transition and decline of the traditional shopping mall industry.
Mhm.
So the other parallel I would draw is a lot of the economics of retail come out of the shopping mall industry because they're required to report sales and rents. and the mall operators report those to central resources like the International Council of Shopping Centers. Downtown areas don't have that. And unless they have a pretty well organized management program that's collecting that data, that monitor is not there. And because of it, it's usually not counted. So one of the challenges has been to figure out the magnitude of the impact because there wasn't an original baseline of data. And
Yeah,
that
so you don't have anything to compare it to, so you
right,
don't really know.
right.
Yeah, and but from your own observation and through the network that you have, what are the early indicators of trends and changes, and how do you see the way in which people work
Yeah.
from home impacting these Main Street retail experiences, especially now since Amazon has built warehouses around airports all over the country, and it's more. You could probably even get something from the store before you get in your car and drive to get it.
Well, it's having a varying effect depending on where you are. I live in the Washington, D.C. area, and Amazon is putting its HQ2 location here in Arlington County, actually within walking distance of National Airport.
Hmm.
And that's having a huge effect on real estate in the area. It's driven up housing prices by 15%. It's driven up construction in the area because they're building thousands of new multifamily condos and rental units nearby because they're attracting that young, typically young, highly trained tech professional on the administrative side. And then the warehousing employs a whole range of people in other kinds of locations. So in this particular market, things are thriving, although the stores are suffering on an individual basis and are gradually coming back as businesses can reopen and people can go out. The curious thing is, particularly for food service, a lot of people who worked in the food service industry had to leave to go find other kinds of work. And as restaurants open, the consumer on the demand side is desperate to get out and go out and eat and hear live music and go to a bar and hang out with their friends. And the restaurants are having a tough time finding people to work there. I passed a Domino's pizza delivery place the other day on an errand, and they were offering a $500 signing bonus for somebody to come on and deliver pizzas. So it's been spotty in other areas where the market may not be as volatile. I think the recovery will happen, but it's going to be a little slower than we hoped because the industry's undergone a major change and the labor force just isn't there, at least for the near term.
So how do you see the whole idea of people working from home? Obviously, you're working from
Yeah,
home, and the whole shift, even here where I live, which is over the hill from San Jose, which is Silicon Valley. uh, there's a big increase in the housing market.
yeah,
I think because Santa Cruz and Santa Cruz County is a much more subdued area than the San Jose region,
yeah,
which was more convenient for people to live when they had to go to Cupertino to the Apple campus or to the Google campus. I mean, so people are just, if they're allowed to work from home, they're migrating away from these
yeah,
large campus worlds, and so that could have a big impact where these large campuses supported a lot of local retail in the area. Um, and so how does that working from home impact downtowns and main streets?
yeah. I think in major cities, it's had a profound and will have a lasting effect. I talked to a friend who was in New York not long ago. I haven't been up there in a year and a half. The Manhattan is the office populations are decimated. Down in the Wall Street area, there's nobody there. If they had not converted some of the office buildings to housing, it would be empty.
Mhm.
The same thing has happened here in Washington, where with both the government and the private sector, people working remotely, it's worked very well. And there's a lot of question now about in the commercial real estate industry about whether the office will come back in the same way. I know that the tech, we're recording this in June of 2021. And just within the last week, a number of the major tech companies have said that they're going to start encouraging people to come back in at least for several days a week in the office because they want the interaction,
Mhm.
and that people miss that interaction, and that it's been very awkward to have some people in an office in a meeting sitting physically in a room together and other people connecting from home, and the people from home want to be there. So I think the tech industry may lead us with that, but what it represents for law firms and other professional office tenants, I think remains to be seen, and that's going to cause a serious problem because that commercial ad valorem tax base is critical for metropolitan areas. In
Mhm.
smaller communities, I think it'll come back more quickly because the increment is much easier to rebuild.
You had mentioned before, the conversion. Now the this is a cyclical thing. You know, all of a sudden everybody's building offices, and then they're not building offices anymore. Then everybody's building residential, and they're not building residential. Then they convert residential into offices and back and forth. So even hotels are beginning to cordon off some of their space for residential because they don't really envision a return to the large convention
Yeah.
world that used to exist, at least in the short term. But as you have these downtown areas, even like a downtown DC or other kind of major cities, just converting from office to residential, and people are working from their homes, do you see that maybe the way that they socialize may alter because their schedule will be more flexible, where they don't necessarily have to be locked into working 9 to 5, and that maybe they'll go out and socialize and shop during the daytime when they take a break in the afternoon? It's like, oh, okay, I don't have to work 9 to 5. I could take a 2 hour break. I could go meet my friends. We can
Yeah.
you see more places offering what they call sober drinks or non-alcoholic drinks for those who want to go out and meet in a bar or some other place, but not necessarily have alcohol because they know they have to go back home. Do you see a day life, especially with all of this expanded streeteries and outdoor cafes? And do you see more like a cafe society happening in these downtowns with the people living close to downtown and offices really not being what they used to be?
Yes, I do see it coming back. I think you're right. We live in a walkable neighborhood near commercial district that is very much food and beverage and nightlife oriented here in Arlington, Virginia. And um, I've noticed as I've been out more, there are more people eating lunch for longer time periods. There are people gathering for early happy hours that I see sitting outside. I think they're doing exactly that because they have the flexibility to do so, and that appreciation and willingness to participate in that kind of flexibility appears to be skewing toward younger consumers. So that's good.
Mhm.
I think that will bode well for spreading the spending period out over the day, both for food and beverage gathering and for other kinds of retail in nearby areas. The nightlife market, there's so much pent up demand everywhere. People are desperate to get out and to be in a sociable setting again. So I think we're going to see a resurgence, but I think it will not be immediate. All the social trends are there, but we've got a labor shortage, and municipalities are not consistent in the way they're managing this and how they're managing distancing and masking and all that as we start to come out of COVID. So I think it will come back. I think it will extend over the day in a different way than it did before when it was very much segregated by day part.
Mhm.
Um, but we'll see. It's just going to take a while for people to find their balance again, get new staff trained and so forth. We ate at a neighborhood restaurant last night that we've gone to for many years. It's the same management and the same owner, and the entire wait staff was new and still being trained. Quite obviously, they weren't there yet. The
Mhm.
quality of the service wasn't back yet, but at least they were open. So
Yeah.
I think it's going to take a while to kind of rebalance this disproportionate emptiness we've had for the last year and a half.
So when you're looking at this, then, like you said previously, there was not a lot of data points that were being collected in downtowns. People didn't really understand even the breakdown between day, evening, and late night, either socializing or shopping. Moving forward, how would you recommend people really kind of get a handle on what they should be doing and how should they be planning for these transitions? If they have a lot of vacant retail office space or retail storefronts that are that used to be where people would shop, how do you envision property owners or Main Street planners or business improvement district managers? How do you see them kind of coming up with the magic formula to say, oh, well, we used to be more daytime because we had all the office workers and early evening, and then everybody went home and we didn't have much nightlife, or they were more nightlife because they were close to residential areas and they had more nighttime activity. I mean, how do you start creating the data points to determine where you're at and how best to say, okay, how do we fill these gaps? What do we want to do with these
Yeah.
gaps?
Well, there are clear opportunities and needs across the board. And depending on where you stand in the formula, whether you're a local government that needs property tax and sales tax, or a building owner or a building developer manager that has vacancies you want to fill, or a business owner who may need a new location, or a business startup, and that's one of the opportunities we'll come back to. This is a great chance for this generational transition and for new business startups. But what's typically been missing is affordable financing and available financing for small businesses. And as areas got busy, the landlords got, from my point of view, a little greedy and started squeezing out the local businesses that add the flavor and the texture to things, because they could get a chain store to pay 1.5 times the rent. They would go with the chain. And now many of those are closed and aren't coming back. So I
Mhm.
hope in this period of recovery, we can rebalance the economics a little, where typically rent should be in the range of 8 to 12% of gross annual sales. And it's on the higher end for food and beverage and on the lower end for retail.
Mhm.
So there's a range that ought to be the fair rent. And we've had property owners who have had no rent or partial rent for over a year. And we've had business owners with low or partial income for a year. So it was getting skewed in a way that the property owner had a little too much authority that was pushing businesses out unfairly. So
Mhm.
I hope now it's a little more equitable. I hope it's going to encourage new business starts, and that banks will realize they have an interest in small business. They
Mhm.
typically don't want to mess with it, but that's where the job creation is. So the metrics that I would look at are who lives nearby, how many are there, what's the age, what's the demographic profile, where do you have your vacancies, how big are those spaces, what's it going to take to make them usable, does the local zoning support mixed use, because very often it doesn't. You have to go in for a variance. Often building code enforcement is very separated,
Mhm.
and it's awkward or impossible to get a building approval to open a business in a mixed use building. So it's time to rethink a number of these old tropes that just aren't going to function anymore, and do it in a way that each of those self-interests can be addressed and people can come together in a communal setting.
So you have all these varying market forces that are shifting the way people shop, the way people socialize, how they want to spend their money. You've got the market forces for the property owners and the developers determining where the next development project they should invest in. Should it be office? Should it be, a residential? You have all of the philosophy from the '90s with residential development that the first floor had to be retail, and so now you have all of this residential development with a lot of empty retail because they nobody anticipated Amazon, right? So there's a lot of things that are going on. But what I hear you saying is it's a combination of factors that you need the metrics to figure out where you are. You have to determine where the gaps are. You need government policy that has to recognize that they have to facilitate a return to that small business entrepreneur that really creates the vibrancy both for the residential and the office that maybe drive some of the resurgence. And And those are the variables that I hear you said need to all come together. Government working with property owners working with tenants, consumers, really being more upfront about what it is that they want. So these are all the variables that seem to be coming together. Now, if they all happen 18 months from now, what do you envision main streets and downtowns will look like? How will people shop and socialize? And to what extent do you think government will actually do what they're supposed to do?
Yeah, well, government's always slow to respond, and creative, adaptable government is also rare, as we know. I think they're not going to have much choice but to listen because the situation has been pretty dire. We have a national housing shortage. Um, Looking 18 months out, I think people have been so negatively affected by isolation and by containment and having to work and live at home and not associate with other people. I think we're going to see a strong renewal of the economy, of the nightlife economy, of the retail economy. But there are a lot of things to sort through before we get there. The other parallel I would draw in this that I think is quite positive is that we're going through a demographic shift from the aging baby boomers who have typically owned businesses, worked in the workforce in significant numbers, are now retiring and dying off. And as the emerging generations X, Y, and Z, the millennial generations, come up and step into those roles and have higher incomes and more spending power and reach that point in their lives, they also are much more tech savvy and much more entrepreneurial. And I've been optimistic for the last few years that as the old boomers like me get out of the way, the young folks coming up that are stepping in are going to be starting thousands and hundreds of thousands of new businesses because that generation is entrepreneurial. So I'm actually quite optimistic for the long term. I think the next 6, 8 months are going to be rocky and spotty as we rebuild, but systems will get back in place and the market demand is absolutely there. So I'm quite optimistic about it as long as we can find good places with affordable rents to let people build their businesses back.
Wow, great projection, Tom. Let's hope everything comes together. Well, this has been a very insightful interview, and I really appreciate your taking the time. And look forward to seeing if your prediction is correct. We'll revisit this 18 months from now.
Sounds good.
Okay,
All right. Thank you,
thanks.
Jim.
Bye.